Hey, I wanted to take a couple minutes and talk about a topic that's actually been on my mind quite a bit recently, and that's burnout in our industry and burnout in the IT security and computer professional industry as general. This was kind of triggered by a post that happened yesterday in one of the communities that I'm in, where one of the members asked if he was wrong because he was so burnt out that he basically ignored the Log4j vulnerability until following the weekend, and it started a whole discussion in a couple of communities that I'm in about that and about the entire security stance of our industry in general. And as is normally the way I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I kind of want to tailor what I'm talking about here largely to small businesses and MSPs, trying to straddle that line there a little bit where they kind of meet. The problem is that the current cadence of security risks is increasing. I haven't put any data around it yet this year, but I've certainly been noticing that the cadence of what I would consider world-breaking vulnerabilities is increasing very quickly. Right, you had late last year, right? SIGRED, I think it was late last year, the DNS-based stuff that was going around. Already this year, we had the big Kaseya incident in July. A couple other things earlier in the year. We had Print Nightmare, which continues to be a nightmare for everyone involved, although it's finally maybe starting to wrap up, and now we're sitting on this Log4j stuff. And the Log4j stuff is going to be continuing for some unknown amount of time right now. And the problem there is that if you're a standard, what I'll consider, smaller to medium-sized MSP, so we'll say even up to our size, right? So anything I'll say less than maybe 25 employees, it becomes really hard to deal with the constant influx of security things coming at you because you can't plan for them, right? So we build our entire business model around the ability to plan around issues and be proactive and do things to try to prevent running from broken thing to broken thing, right? It's like that is the entirety of the MSP business model, is to produce a relatively predictable spend and relatively predictable downtime for our clients, right? It's what we do. But when these security incidents come up, you can't predict them, and in many cases, your ability to prevent them is relatively limited. And you can do the things that everyone does, right? You can make sure your AV's up to date. If you're good, you have some sort of detection capabilities in place, right? So on the NIST security functions, right? You're not just doing prevent, right? You've got some detection capabilities too. But it's really hard because now you've got these situations where basically your entire client base is potentially on fire, and you end up having to drop everything and run around and try to solve that. The real issue with that is for a lot of these smaller MSPs, they're just not equipped and staffed to do that, right? They can't. They can, and they do. They run around like heroes and try to solve everything and try to get all their clients patched as quickly as possible. But that's not sustainable long term. So I think the solution is something that we've kind of taken in heart here, and it's more of a checklist based risk modeling approach, right? So we have to accept the fact that when a threat comes out like this, it's unfeasible to immediately patch everybody, right? You just don't have the resources and the manpower to do it. So what we do is we look at the risk and the cost of a breach, and we kind of go from there, right? So I'll give an example of what we did here for Log4j, right? If it was internet facing, it's got to get shut down or patched immediately, and the reason is that this was a weaponized exploit. It was going around, and if you waited, the possibility that you had a compromise was near 100%, I would say, by Tuesday or Wednesday after it happened, because people were just spraying this stuff around the internet. If it's not internet facing, then you kind of end up at the second thing where it's like, does it consume data from the outside in a way that might potentially leave it vulnerable, right? And so I'm talking about things like maybe you consume form fields that were put on a website and import them later into some sort of internal software package. Well, that package could be vulnerable, right? So the second tier of things we want to take care of are those things, right? And maybe we stop a business process and say, hey, I need you to not import any data into these tools, and so we can evaluate them to make sure they're good. So once we get those things, we've stemmed the immediate risk, right? We've basically stemmed the ability from somebody outside of the control of our network to come in and impact you. Right, so then from there we move on to the third group, which is anyone regulated, right? So if you're HIPAA or you're PCI or you're financially regulated, even if the risk is low, the cost of breach from both a reputational point and a regulatory point ends up being high enough that we have to consider you next. And then the fourth one is, essentially everyone else, right? So these vulnerabilities, yeah, they're bad, and we can do, and we should do everything we can do to protect them. But in the end, what does that boil down to, right? Does it make sense to start digging into vendor software packages and gutting out pieces of them in an attempt to prevent this, right? Like, I think you have to consider carefully the supportability piece of doing that and other things. So, we kind of made the decision that we're taking it on a case-by-case basis, and in some cases, we're simply waiting for vendor patches. We know they need them. We've done our best to identify the software packages that are needed, but we've decided that if the person is in the network anyways, utilizing these things for lateral movement it's already a thing that we're going to have to deal with, right? So our detection capabilities in many cases are good enough that we can afford to do that. So I'm kind of in closing here, right? I think that this is going to continue to be a problem for the smaller MSPs, and they're going to have to at some point or another gain some sort of triage capabilities, or they're going to burn out and end up closing, or they're going to or ignoring problems and end up getting their clients compromised. So that's it, and I'll see you next time.